I stared at the half-empty wine glass on our granite counter, watching a single drop slide down its curve. Such a small thing, that drop, but it held my whole world in its descent. The lipstick mark on the rim wasn't mine. Wrong shade, wrong story. My name is Ruby, and 10 minutes ago, I was just a tired mother trying to get through another Tuesday night. Now I'm someone else entirely. Sarah's finally down. I called out to Nate, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like a held breath. I heard him shuffling papers in his home office, probably pretending to work late again. The same excuse he'd been using for months now. Thanks, babe. I've got this big presentation tomorrow. The wine glass caught the kitchen light, throwing prisms across the wall. I touched the stem, wondering how many nights it had sat here, waiting for me to notice. How many nights had I walked past, too busy with our daughter to see what was right in front of me? Your mother called earlier, I said, moving toward his office. She wants us over for dinner on Sunday. Did you tell her we're busy? I pushed his door open. He didn't look up from his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue screen glow. The same face I'd woken up to for 8 years, now somehow foreign. Actually, I told her we'd love to come. His fingers paused over the keyboard. Ruby, you know I have that thing. What thing, Nate? The same thing that kept you at the office until midnight last Thursday. The wine glass was still in my hand. I set it down on his desk, right next to his mouse pad. The same thing wearing MAC Ruby Woo lipstick? His face didn't crumple with guilt like I expected. Instead, it hardened like cement setting. You're being paranoid. Am I? Because I just got off the phone with Tom from accounting. He said you left the office at 5 today. 3 hours ago. My voice stayed low. Sarah was sleeping just down the hall. Where were you, Nate? He stood up slowly, towering over me like he used to do when we argued about bills or his mother's constant interference. I don't have to explain myself to you. Actually, you do. You owe me that much. I owe you. He laughed. But it wasn't the laugh I fell in love with in college. This was something else. Sharp, dismissive. Look at yourself, Ruby. When's the last time you wore makeup? Or bought new clothes? You spend all your time with Sarah, acting like some martyr. Don't you dare. My fingers curled into fists. Don't you dare make this about me being a mother to our child. His phone buzzed on the desk. We both looked at it. A text message lit up the screen, missing you already. Last night was. The rest disappeared into preview limbo. But it was enough. The contact name read Olivia B. I can't explain, he started, but I was already backing away. Save it for Sunday, I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. I'm sure your parents would love to hear all about Olivia B. His face went pale. You wouldn't. Watch me. I turned and walked out, each step measured and precise. Sarah's room was dark except for her nightlight, casting star patterns on the ceiling. I stood in her doorway, watching her tiny chest rise and fall. Ruby, Nate called from behind me, his voice urgent now. Let's talk about this. But I was done talking. Done pretending. Done being the perfect wife who looked the other way. I had something better to be now. A mother protecting her child from lies. A woman protecting herself from betrayal. And soon, very soon, I'd be something else too. The architect of Nate Parker's complete and total destruction. James's spare bedroom smelled like fresh laundry and old books. I sat cross-legged on the bed, watching Sarah crawl across the floor, chasing dust motes in the afternoon light. 3 days since I'd walked out. 3 days of missed calls and increasingly desperate texts from Nate. You can't hide here forever, little sister. James leaned against the doorframe, coffee mug in hand. Though I admit, watching you plot revenge while changing diapers has a certain charm. I'm not plotting revenge. I picked up Sarah as she grabbed for an electrical outlet. I'm planning justice. Same thing, different font. He sat beside me, the bed creaking under his weight. Linda called again. My stomach tightened. Of course she had. Nate's mother never could resist meddling. What did she want? To remind you about Sunday dinner. Said, and I quote, family problems should stay within family walls. He mimicked her precise, clipped tone perfectly. I snorted. Funny how those walls only exist when they're protecting Nate. Sarah squirmed in my arms, reaching for pretending everything's fine just to keep the peace. My phone buzzed, another text from Nate. Please come home. We can work this out. James read it over my shoulder. Have you told Maya yet? No. The guilt of keeping this from my best friend gnawed at me. She's been so excited about her promotion. I didn't want to dump this on her. Ruby. James's voice carried that big brother weight I'd known all my life. You need your people around you right now. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Sarah clapped her hands, delighted by the sound. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of Linda's silver Mercedes in the driveway. Speak of the devil, James muttered. Want me to send her away? I stood up, shifting Sarah to my hip. No. It's time she heard the truth about her precious son. Linda Parker's perfectly coiffed appearance hadn't changed since the day she'd first disapproved of me dating her son. She swept into James's living room like she owned it, designer handbag clutched like a shield. Ruby, darling. Her smile was brittle as old china. This little vacation has gone on long enough, don't you think? Has it? I kept my voice level. How long should finding out about your son's affair take? The color drained from her face. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding I cut in was me thinking Nate was capable of being faithful. She sank onto James's couch, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tight. These things, they happen in marriages. Surely you don't want to destroy your family over one indiscretion. James made a disgusted sound from the doorway. Jesus, Linda. Stay out of this, James. She turned back to me, her voice honey-sweet. Think of Sarah. She needs her father. She needs honest people in her life. I held my daughter closer. Not liars and cheats. And what about Sunday dinner? Linda's voice sharpened. The whole family will be there. Do you really want to air your dirty laundry in front of everyone? A slow smile spread across my face, the kind that would have worried me if I'd seen it in the mirror. Actually, Linda, I think Sunday dinner is exactly what we need. The whole family should know exactly who Nate really is. You wouldn't dare. Her mask slipped, showing the fear beneath. Watch me. I walked to the front door and opened it. Now get out of my brother's house. After she left, James whistled low. You know this means war, right? I watched Linda's Mercedes pull away, thinking of the wine glass of Olivia B's text message. Of all the nights I'd spent alone with Sarah while Nate worked late. Good, I said and meant it. Let's give them something worth fighting about. Maya's office felt too bright, too normal for the conversation we were having. She sat across from me at her desk, her new executive nameplate catching the afternoon sun, while I scrolled through the screenshots James had helped me collect from Nate's cloud backup. 6 months. Maya's voice cracked. The receipts go back 6 months. Restaurants, hotel rooms. She stopped, staring at a particular charge. The 4 seasons? On your anniversary. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. The same night I'd been home with a colicky Sarah, thinking Nate was working late on the Peterson account. I should have told you sooner. Maya pushed away from her desk. I saw them once at Café Rouge. I thought, God, I convinced myself it was a business meeting. Everyone wants to believe the best version of the story. I closed the laptop, unable to look at any more evidence of my husband's betrayal. Even me. Maya's office door opened without a knock. Thompson, we need the Q3 projections. The voice stopped cold. It was Olivia Brooks, holding a stack of reports, wearing the same shade of lipstick I'd found on my wine glass. The air left the room. Sorry, Olivia said quickly. I didn't realize you had a meeting. No. I stood slowly. You're exactly who I needed to see. Maya's eyes widened as she made the connection. Ruby. How long? I asked Olivia. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone else. How long have you been sleeping with my husband? The reports slipped from her hands, scattering across the floor. I don't know what you're talking about. The 4 seasons, June 15th. I stepped closer. Our anniversary. Was that your idea or his? Color drained from her face. He told me you were separated. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere dark inside me. Separated? I was home with our 1-year-old daughter while he was. I stopped, watching her face crumple. You really believed him? He said you wouldn't let him see Sarah. Olivia's voice shrank. That you were using her to control him. The fury that had been building since that wine glass discovery suddenly crystallized into something colder, clearer. Maya, could you give us a minute? Maya hesitated, then nodded, closing the door behind her. Sit down, I told Olivia. Let me tell you about the man you've been sleeping with. 20 minutes later, I walked out of Maya's office, leaving behind a sobbing Olivia and 6 months' worth of carefully documented lies. My phone buzzed, another text from Nate. Please, Ruby. I'll do anything to fix this. I smiled, thinking of the recording app that had been running during my entire conversation with Olivia. You will, I whispered to myself. You absolutely will. Maya caught up with me at the elevator. That was. She shook her head. I've never seen you like this. Neither has Nate. The elevator doors opened. That's why he won't see it coming. What are you planning? I thought of Sunday dinner, of Linda's perfectly arranged table settings and Tom's quiet disappointment in his son. I thought of Sarah, who deserved better than a father who could lie so easily, who could turn his own daughter into a weapon against her mother. Justice, I said, stepping into the elevator. Or revenge. At this point, they look exactly the same. Ruby, Maya held the door. Just be careful. Revenge can change people. I'm counting on it. The doors closed on her worried face. Outside, the city hummed with afternoon traffic. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Linda. Whatever you're planning for Sunday, don't think of your daughter. I was thinking of Sarah, of the moment she'd be old enough to understand what her father had done, what kind of man he really was, of the example I needed to set, not of forgiveness or turning the other cheek, but of standing up, of refusing to let someone else write your story. I typed back a single word, soon. Then I called James. I need your help with something for Sunday dinner. Please tell me it doesn't involve actual murder, he said. Nothing so merciful, I replied, watching the sun sink behind the city's skyline. We're going to tell the truth. The manila envelope sat between us on Tom Parker's desk like a loaded gun. He hadn't opened it yet, just stared at it with the same stern expression he'd worn through 30 years as a judge. You understand what you're asking? His voice carried the weight of countless difficult decisions. Once this starts, Ruby, there's no going back. I touched the envelope's edge. Inside were bank statements, hotel receipts, photos from private investigators. 6 months of Nate's carefully hidden second life. I understand perfectly. Linda will never forgive you. Linda never approved of me in the first place. I met his gaze. But you've always been fair, Tom. That's why I'm here. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying me. Why not just divorce him? Take half and start fresh. Because half isn't enough. The words tasted like copper in my mouth. He needs to lose everything, just like I did. Tom opened his desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Before you commit to this, there's something you should see. My hands shook as I read the document. It was a loan application, dated 3 weeks ago. Nate's signature at the bottom, requesting to mortgage our house. The house I'd helped pay for, the home where Sarah took her first steps. He doesn't have the authority, I said. My name's on the deed. Look at the second page. There it was, my signature, perfectly forged. The date, the notary stamp, all of it flawless. How did you get this? The bank manager is an old friend. Tom's voice softened. He thought something seemed off, asked me to look into it. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the armrest of my chair. The money, where did it go? That's the interesting part. Tom handed me another paper. A down payment on a condo. Not in his name, though. Olivia Brooks. The name felt like poison on my tongue. He's been planning to leave you, Ruby. Tom's words fell like stones in still water. The affair, the money, it's all been leading to this. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. Harsh, unfamiliar. So while I've been plotting my revenge, he's been orchestrating your destruction. Tom finished. The Sunday dinner announcement wasn't going to be about his affair. It was going to be about our separation. The pieces clicked into place. He was going to blindside me in front of everyone. Make you look unstable, emotional. Tom nodded. Build a case for full custody of Sarah. The room went very quiet. Outside his study window, I could see Linda in the garden, preparing for Sunday's dinner like nothing was wrong, like her son wasn't trying to destroy me. What are my options? My voice sounded distant, cold. Legally? We can fight the forgery, press charges. Tom tapped the manila envelope. Use your evidence to counter his claims. And unofficially, he studied me for a long moment. You could let him think he's winning. Let him make his announcement on Sunday. And then, a small smile crossed his face. You could show everyone exactly who Nate Parker really is. I stood up, gathering the papers. Why are you helping me? He's your son. Because 30 years on the bench taught me something. Tom rose, walking me to the door. Sometimes justice needs a little help finding its way. As I left, Linda called out from the garden. Ruby? Is everything all right? I waved, the perfect daughter-in-law smile plastered on my face. Just discussing Sunday dinner with Tom. It's going to be quite memorable. Walking to my car, I called James. Change of plans. We're not just exposing the affair anymore. What do you mean? I thought of the forged documents, the secret condo, the carefully orchestrated plan to take my daughter away. We're going to let Nate think he's won. Right up until the moment we destroy him completely. Ruby. James hesitated. Are you sure about this? I watched Linda pruning her roses, preparing for a family dinner that would shatter her perfect world. He tried to take everything from me, James. Now I'm going to return the favor. Linda's dining room gleamed like a stage set, crystal glasses catching the late afternoon sun. Sarah sat in her high chair, happily mashing peas while the adults around the table performed their usual Sunday ritual of polite conversation and hidden daggers. Ruby dear. Linda passed the roast with a brittle smile. You look tired. Is everything all right at James's? Before I could answer, Nate cleared his throat. Actually, Mother, I have an announcement to make. My hand tightened around my wine glass. Across the table, Tom caught my eye, a slight nod passing between us. Ruby and I. Nate paused for effect, reaching for Olivia's favorite dramatic flair. We've been having problems. Linda gasped perfectly on cue. Oh, darling. I've tried to make it work. His voice cracked with practiced emotion. For Sarah's sake. But Ruby's become unstable. I took a slow sip of wine, letting the silence stretch. James shifted in his chair beside me, but I touched his knee under the table. Wait. The thing is, Nate continued, I've already filed for separation. And given Ruby's recent behavior, I'll be seeking full custody of Sarah. The room went still. Linda dabbed at her eyes with her napkin while Tom studied his plate. This was Nate's moment, his carefully orchestrated destruction of my life. I set down my glass. Are you finished? Ruby, he started, but I cut him off. Because I have an announcement too. I reached into my purse, pulling out an envelope. About the condo you bought for Olivia. The color drained from his face. What? The one you paid for by forging my signature on a loan application. I slid the documents across the table. Fraud is such an ugly word, isn't it? Linda snatched up the papers. These must be fake. Like the signature? I smiled. The bank manager didn't think so. Neither did the police when I filed charges this morning. Nate stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward. You're lying. Sit down, son. Tom's voice carried the weight of 3 decades on the bench. There's more. I pulled out my phone, playing the recording from Maya's office. Olivia's voice filled the room. He said you were separated. He told me you wouldn't let him see Sarah. Turn it off, Nate demanded. Why? This is my favorite part. I let it continue. He promised we'd be together. Said once he got custody. Linda's face had gone ash white. Nate, tell me this isn't true. It's not what you think. Then explain the hotel receipts. I laid them out like playing cards. The 4 seasons on our anniversary. The weekend in Vegas when I had Sarah in the hospital with pneumonia. You vindictive bitch. He lunged across the table, but James was faster, catching his arm. Touch her, James said quietly, and fraud will be the least of your charges. Sarah started crying, the tension finally breaking through her toddler bubble. I lifted her from the high chair, holding her close. You want custody? I faced Nate. Fine. Explain to a judge how you committed fraud. Explain the affair, the secret condo, the plans to abandon your family. Explain why you weren't there when your daughter was sick because you were too busy fucking your mistress. Language. Linda protested weakly. No, Mother. I turned to her. For once, You're going to hear the truth about your precious son." "This isn't over," Nate snarled. "Actually, it is." Tom stood up, placing a hand on my shoulder. "The police will be here soon. I called them before dinner." The sound of sirens grew in the distance. Nate's face contorted, reality finally crashing through his carefully constructed lies. "You planned this," he whispered. "All of it." I bounced Sarah gently as she calmed down. "No, nothing. You planned this. I just changed the ending." The police lights painted the dining room in alternating red and blue. Linda sobbed into her napkin while Tom went to answer the door. James stayed close, watching Nate for any sudden moves. "Was it worth it?" I asked Nate as the officers entered. "Destroying everything for her?" He couldn't answer, as they read him his rights in his mother's perfect dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of his perfect lies. The courthouse bathroom mirror reflected a stranger, someone harder, colder than the woman I used to be. Outside, I could hear the muffled sounds of reporters gathering for Nate's arraignment. 3 weeks since the Sunday dinner explosion, and everything was falling apart in ways I hadn't anticipated. Maya appeared behind me, her reflection grim. "Olivia's going to testify for him." The news hit like a physical blow, but I kept my face neutral. "Of course she is. He probably promised her everything again." "Ruby." Maya hesitated. "There's more. The fraud charges might not stick." I gripped the sink's edge. "What?" "His lawyer's arguing that as your husband, he had implicit authority to act on your behalf. And with Olivia backing his story." The door swung open. Linda Parker stood there, perfectly composed in designer black, like she was attending a funeral instead of her son's arraignment. "Could we have a moment?" she asked Maya, who glanced at me before leaving. I turned back to the mirror, reapplying lipstick I didn't need. "Come to defend your precious son again?" "No." She moved beside me, our reflections a study in contrasts. "I came to give you this." She placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check with more zeros than I'd ever seen. "What is this?" "Walk away." Her voice was soft but firm. "Drop the charges, take Sarah, start fresh somewhere else." I laughed, the sound echoing off the tile walls. "You think you can buy me off?" "I think I can save my granddaughter from watching her parents destroy each other." She met my eyes in the mirror. "You've made your point, Ruby. You've hurt him. Isn't that enough?" "Enough." The check crumpled in my fist. "He tried to take everything from me, and now you're trying to take everything from him. Where does it end?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed, a text from James. "Turn on the news." "Now." Linda's phone chimed simultaneously. We both reached for our devices, pulling up different news feeds showing the same headline, "Parker Financial under investigation for fraud." My stomach dropped. The company where I'd worked, where I'd met Nate, where half our savings were invested, was being investigated by the SEC. "Oh God." Linda's hand flew to her mouth. "Tom's retirement fund." The implications hit me like waves. Not just our money, but Tom and Linda's. The other employees. Hundreds of families affected because I'd pushed for an investigation into Nate's fraud, which had led investigators to dig deeper into the company's finances. "This is what revenge gets you," Linda whispered. "It spreads like poison, hurting everyone it touches." The courthouse bathroom suddenly felt too small, too bright. Outside, I could hear the growing crowd of reporters, hungry for blood, any blood. My phone buzzed again, Maya, this time. "They're saying you knew. That you were part of it." Of course they were. I was the whistleblower, the vengeful wife, the perfect scapegoat. Nate would use this, twist it somehow. He always did. "What are you going to do?" Linda asked, watching me carefully. I looked at my reflection again, at the stranger I'd become. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, not just her present, but her future. Growing up with this scandal, this hatred between her parents, this endless cycle of revenge. "I could still testify," Linda said quietly, "about what I knew, what I suspected about Nate's activities at the company." I turned to her, surprised. "You'd do that? To your own son? To save my granddaughter from this mess?" "Yes." She straightened her spine. "But only if you end this war now, before it destroys everyone we love." The courtroom doors would open in 10 minutes. Outside, reporters waited to capture every moment of the Parker family's destruction. Nate would be let in, handcuffed, ready to play his part as the misunderstood victim. And I had to decide, continue pushing until everything burned down around us, or find another way through the ashes. My phone buzzed one final time. James again. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I took a deep breath, staring at the stranger in the mirror until she started to look familiar again. Then I made my choice. The visiting room at the county jail smelled like industrial cleaner and despair. Nate sat across from me, orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his frame, 2 weeks of stubble darkening his jaw. Between us, a stack of papers waited for signatures. You're really doing this? His voice rasped with disuse. Dropping the charges? I aligned the papers perfectly, each corner matching. Yes, but my terms are non-negotiable. He leaned forward, eyes fever bright. I knew you'd come around. Once we get past this. Stop. I pushed the divorce papers toward him. This isn't reconciliation, Nate. This is mercy. His face hardened. Mercy? You destroyed everything. No. I kept my voice steady. You did that when you forged my signature. When you planned to take Sarah. When you let your greed infect the whole company. I was trying to give us a better life. Us? I laughed. Or you and Olivia? His flinch told me everything. She won't return my calls. Of course not. The SEC is investigating her too. I tapped the papers. Sign these and I'll drop the fraud charges. Linda will testify about the company's broader issues, keeping you out of that investigation. And Sarah? Joint custody. The words tasted like ash. But you'll never live with her. Never make decisions about her future. Those rights are mine. He picked up the pen, then paused. Why are you really doing this? I thought of Linda in the courthouse bathroom, of Maya's worried face, of James's unwavering support, of Sarah, who deserved better than parents locked in eternal war. Because revenge doesn't end, Nate. It just keeps taking and taking until there's nothing left. So you're choosing to be noble? His lip curled. The perfect martyr? No. I stood up, gathering my purse. I'm choosing to be free. Sign the papers or I'll see you in court. He grabbed my wrist. Wait. The guard stepped forward, but I held up my hand. It's okay. Nate's grip loosened. I never meant. I didn't want. I know. And suddenly I did know. How small he was, how desperate and afraid. How empty his life had become chasing things that didn't matter. That's what makes it worse. He signed the papers with shaking hands. Each scratch of the pen felt like closing a door, sealing off the past. What will you tell Sarah? He asked as I gathered the documents. The truth. When she's old enough to understand it. And what truth is that? I paused at the door. That her father loved her, but forgot how to love anything else. That sometimes the greatest act of strength is choosing to stop fighting. Ruby. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I know that too. I turned back one last time. But sorry doesn't fix what's broken. It just lets us walk away from the wreckage. Outside, James waited by his car. You okay? I handed him the signed papers, watching through the window as guards led Nate back to his cell. I thought this would feel different. More satisfying. Because it's not revenge anymore. Because it's not anything anymore. I got into the car, buckling my seatbelt with steady hands. It's just over. Where to? James started the engine. I thought of Sarah waiting at Maya's, of the apartment I'd found across town, of the job interview lined up for next week. Of all the pieces of a new life waiting to be assembled. Forward, I said and meant it. Just forward. As we pulled away from the jail, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda. Thank you. I didn't respond. Some thanks, like some apologies, were better left in silence. Some victories looked more like surrender. And sometimes the price of betrayal wasn't paid in revenge, but in the quiet courage it took to walk away. James turned onto the highway, and I didn't look back. There was nothing there I needed to see anymore. Sarah's laughter echoed through the park as she chased pigeons across the grass, her tiny legs carrying her faster each day. The autumn air held that perfect crispness that made everything feel possible. She's getting so big. Maya handed me a coffee, settling beside me on the bench. Starting to look more like you. Thank God for small mercies. I watched Sarah wobble and catch herself, proud and determined. Just like her mother, James always said. My phone buzzed. Tom's number. I'd been expecting this call since Nate's release last week. Ruby? He's asking to see Sarah. The old anger didn't rise like it used to. The custody agreement. I know. Tom's voice carried the weight of everything we'd been through. He's different now. The program. It helped. I watched Sarah crouch down to examine a fallen leaf, her whole world contained in its simple beauty. What do you think? I think. He paused. I think sometimes people deserve a chance to prove they've changed. But it's your call. Maya squeezed my hand as I ended the call. She'd been there through everything. The divorce, the company's collapse, the slow rebuilding of a life I never knew I wanted. You don't owe him anything, she said. I know. I stood up, walking toward Sarah. But maybe I owe her the chance to decide for herself someday. Sarah ran to me, leaf held high like a trophy. Mama, look. I scooped her up, breathing in her baby shampoo smell. Beautiful. Should we save it? She nodded seriously, tucking it into my jacket pocket. Over her shoulder, I saw Linda approaching across the grass, hesitant but determined. I can ask her to leave, Maya offered. No. I set Sarah down. Go play with Aunt Maya for a minute, sweetheart. Linda looked older, the past year etched into new lines around her eyes. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. I wasn't either. I touched the leaf in my pocket. But here we are. Tom told you about Nate? Yes. She watched Sarah playing with Maya. He's not asking for forgiveness. Good. Because I'm not offering it. No. She smiled slightly. You're stronger than that now. A memory surfaced. Linda in that courthouse bathroom, offering me a check to walk away. We all are. Ruby. She turned to me, eyes bright. Thank you. For stopping when you did. For choosing peace over punishment. I didn't do it for him. Or you. I know. She reached out, tentative, and squeezed my arm. That's why it mattered. Sarah's squeal of delight drew our attention. She'd found another leaf. This one bright red against the green grass. Would you like to join us? I surprised myself by asking. We're getting ice cream after. Linda's breath caught. I'd like that very much. As we walked toward Maya and Sarah, my phone buzzed again. A text from Nate. I understand if you say no. I looked at Sarah, at her joy in simple things, at her ability to love without conditions or consequences, at the future stretching before her, unmarred by the shadows of the past. Next weekend, I typed back. 1 hour. Maya's place. His response came quickly. Thank you. I didn't reply. Some things didn't need words anymore. Some wounds healed better in silence. Some victories weren't about winning or losing, but about finding the strength to begin again. Sarah ran back to me, another leaf in her small fist. For you, Mama. I took it. This simple gift, this reminder that beauty could grow from broken things. That sometimes the price of betrayal wasn't paid in revenge or forgiveness, but in the quiet courage to keep living, keep loving, keep believing in the possibility of better days. Thank you, baby. I tucked both leaves into my pocket, safekeeping these moments of grace. Let's go get that ice cream. We walked together, mother, daughter, friend, family both old and new, into whatever came next, carrying our scars like medals, our hopes like promises, our love like the leaves Sarah collected, imperfect, temporary, but beautiful in their own way.
My name's Miranda, and this is my story. My parents, Jack and Linda Thompson, had it all: successful careers, a beautiful house in the suburbs, and a plan. A plan that involved having a son, their precious heir. Instead, they got me. I remember the day I realized I wasn't the child they'd hoped for. I was 5, playing with my dolls in the living room when I overheard my mom on the phone. Yes, it's true. We're having a boy. Her voice was filled with an excitement I'd never heard before. Oh, you have no idea how long we've waited for this. Finally, a son. Those words cut deep. I didn't fully understand then, but I felt it, the sting of being second best, unwanted. Things changed quickly after that. Mom's belly grew bigger, and so did the distance between us. Dad was always working, and when he was home, all the talk was about the baby boy on the way. One day, Mom called me into the kitchen. Miranda, sweetie, we need to talk. I climbed onto a chair, my legs dangling. What is it, Mommy? She didn't look at me as she spoke. You're going to stay with Grandma for a while. Isn't that exciting? Mommy and Daddy need to prepare for the baby. You'll have more fun with Grandma anyway. And just like that, I was packed off to Grandma's house. Grandma Rose was Dad's mom, a retired English literature professor. She lived in a cozy little house filled with books and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Living with Grandma was different. She actually paid attention to me, listened when I talked, and didn't seem bothered by my presence. We'd spend hours reading together, and she'd tell me stories about when she was a teacher. For the first time in my life, I felt loved, truly loved. 2 years flew by. I was 7 when Dad showed up at Grandma's doorstep. It's time to come home, Miranda, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Your brother needs you. Brother, the word felt foreign. As we drove home, Dad filled the silence with awkward small talk. Your brother's name is Ethan, he's one now. You're a big sister now, Miranda. That's a big responsibility. I nodded, not really understanding what that meant. Little did I know, my childhood was about to end. We pulled into the driveway of our house. It looked the same, but it felt different. Mom was waiting at the door, a toddler on her hip. Miranda, meet your brother, Ethan, she said, her voice oddly formal. I looked at the chubby-faced boy with curly blonde hair. He gurgled and reached out a pudgy hand towards me. Hi, Ethan, I said softly. And just like that, at 7 years old, I became more than a sister. I became a caretaker, a responsibility, a built-in babysitter. My childhood slipped away, replaced by dirty diapers, constant vigilance, and the weight of expectations I was too young to bear. While my classmates were playing with dolls and learning to ride bikes, I was changing diapers and warming bottles. Miranda, can you watch Ethan while I make a call? Mom would say, not really asking. I'd nod, already reaching for my little brother. It wasn't that I didn't love Ethan, I did, fiercely. His toothless grin and grabby little hands had won me over from day one. But the constant responsibility was overwhelming. Days blurred together in a haze of school, chores, and babysitting. I was exhausted, struggling to keep up with my homework while making sure Ethan was safe and happy. But no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. One fateful day, I took Ethan to the park. He was 2 now, full of energy and curiosity. I turned my back for just a second to tie my shoelace, and in that moment, disaster struck. Miwanda! Ethan's cry pierced the air, followed by a thud. I whirled around to see him sprawled on the ground, his knee bleeding. Panic seized me as I scooped him up, trying to soothe his wails. When we got home, Mom exploded. How could you be so careless, she shouted, cradling Ethan. You're supposed to watch him. I'm sorry, I just... No excuses, Dad chimed in, his face red with anger. Go to your room. We'll discuss your punishment later. I fled upstairs, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't fair. I was doing my best, but I was just a kid myself. The incidents piled up. Ethan burning his tongue on hot porridge because I didn't blow on it enough. A bump on his head from a fall I couldn't prevent. Each time, the punishments got harsher, the disappointment in my parents' eyes more evident. Through it all, Grandma Rose was my lifeline. She'd visit when she could, her presence a balm to my battered spirit. During one visit, I overheard her confronting my parents in the kitchen. This is unacceptable, Grandma's usually gentle voice was sharp. Miranda is a child, not a nanny. Your favoritism towards Ethan is hurting her. Mother, please, Dad sighed. These are our children. We know what's best for them. Do you? Grandma challenged. Because from where I'm standing, you're neglecting one child in favor of the other. That's enough, Mom cut in. We appreciate your concern, but this is our family. We'll raise our children as we see fit. I threw myself into my studies. School became my sanctuary, a place where I could shine on my own merits. And shine I did, my grades a silent rebellion against the notion that I wasn't good enough. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was standing at a crossroads. High school was behind me, and college loomed ahead. Despite the constant struggle at home, I'd managed to excel in my studies. It was my ticket out, my chance at freedom. When the acceptance letter arrived, I could hardly believe my eyes. Not only had I been accepted to study investment management, but I'd also received a full scholarship. My hands shook as I read the words over and over again. "Mom, Dad," I called out, racing down the stairs. "I got in. Full scholarship." "Oh, thank goodness," Mom sighed, relief evident in her voice. "That saves us a fortune. We need to start saving for Ethan's college fund." My heart sank. Of course. It wasn't about my achievement. It was about the money they wouldn't have to spend on me. The first few months were a whirlwind of classes, new friends, and the exhilarating taste of freedom. The money from my parents, combined with the small amounts Grandma Rose secretly sent, was just enough to scrape by. I was careful with every penny, knowing how precious this lifeline was. But 6 months into my college journey, everything changed again. My phone rang one evening as I was studying for a finance exam. "Miranda," Mom's voice came through, curt and businesslike. "We won't be sending you any more money. Ethan needs tutors if he's going to have any chance at college. We need to focus our resources on him now." I felt the familiar sting of rejection, of being cast aside. "But Mom, I can barely." "You're an adult now, Miranda," she cut me off. "You need to solve your own problems. We can't keep supporting you forever." The next few weeks were a blur of stress and sleepless nights. I scoured job boards, applied to every position I could find. Finally, I landed a part-time gig at a nearby cafe. The hours were long, the pay was meager, but it was something. Balancing work and studies was brutal. I'd rush from classes to shifts, then stay up late into the night studying. Dark circles became a permanent fixture under my eyes, and my grades started to slip. One particularly rough day, I called Grandma Rose, desperate for a friendly voice. "Miranda, sweetheart, you sound exhausted," she said, concern evident in her voice. The dam broke. Through tears, I told her everything, the cut-off allowance, the grueling work hours, the struggle to keep up with my studies. "Those absolute," Grandma cut herself off, taking a deep breath. "Listen to me, Miranda, you focus on your studies. I'm increasing your monthly allowance. And don't you dare argue with me about it." "But Grandma." "No buts," she said firmly. "You deserve this education, and you shouldn't have to kill yourself working to get it. Your parents, well, let's just say, I'll be having words with them." True to her word, Grandma's support allowed me to cut back my work hours. I could breathe again, focus on my classes. My grades improved, and for the first time in months, I felt hope. The years at college flew by in a blur of textbooks, exams, and late-night study sessions. Before I knew it, I was standing on the stage, diploma in hand, magna cum laude gleaming on the certificate. As I scanned the audience, I spotted Grandma Rose, beaming with pride. My parents and Ethan were noticeably absent. With my degree in hand, doors opened. I landed a job at Stonebridge Investments, a prestigious firm in the city. The salary was more money than I'd ever seen, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly independent. To save money, I moved in with Sarah, a coworker who became a fast friend. Our tiny apartment was a far cry from the dorms, but it was ours, and it felt like freedom. When my first paycheck arrived, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I scoured every second-hand bookstore in the city until I found it, a rare first edition of Grandma's favorite author. The following weekend, I took a train to my hometown, gift in hand. Grandma's face lit up when she saw me at her door. "Miranda, what a wonderful surprise." I presented her with the wrapped book, watching as tears welled in her eyes when she opened it. "Oh, my dear girl," she whispered, hugging me tight. "You shouldn't have." I wanted to, I said simply. You've done so much for me, Grandma. As we chatted over tea, I mentioned visiting my parents. Grandma's face tightened slightly, but she nodded. I'm sure they'd love to see you. But when I called, Mom's voice was distant. Oh, this weekend? We're quite busy, Miranda. Perhaps another time. The rejection stung, but I pushed it aside. I spent the weekend with Grandma instead, relishing her warmth and genuine interest in my life. As I boarded the train back to the city on Sunday, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and relief. Time marched on. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye, and my career soared. My bosses praised my work ethic and insight, and the bonuses started rolling in. Soon, I was able to afford my own apartment, a small, sun-filled space that was all mine. One evening, as I was settling in for a quiet night, my phone rang. Mom's name flashed on the screen. Miranda, she said without preamble. These teachers, they just don't understand Ethan. They're giving him such poor grades. He barely scraped into City College. I bit my lip, choosing my words carefully. Mom, maybe college isn't the right path for everyone. There are great vocational courses Ethan could. Don't be stupid, she snapped. Your brother is brilliant. Much smarter than you, actually. He's just misunderstood. He'll show everyone, you'll see. As I hung up, I gazed around my apartment, the tangible proof of my success. Yet somehow, I still felt like that little girl, desperately seeking approval. Life has a funny way of appending expectations. While I was building my career, brick by careful brick, Ethan's college experience was crumbling around him. It was a crisp autumn day when Mom called again, her voice tight with frustration. Ethan's been expelled, she said without preamble. He's coming home. She launched into a tirade about unfair professors and a system designed to fail students like Ethan. I listened, biting my tongue against the urge to point out the thousands they'd spent on his education, the loans they'd taken out to rent him a luxury apartment, the generous allowance they'd provided. All things I'd never had. We'll figure something out, Mom concluded. Ethan just needs time to find his path. I thought about Ethan, now 21, returning to our childhood home, while I, at 27, was forging ahead in my career. The contrast was stark, but I pushed the thought aside. Comparison is the thief of joy, after all. Life, however, had other plans for me. It was at a company event that I met Jack, tall, kind-eyed, with a quick wit that made me laugh like I hadn't in years. Our whirlwind romance swept me off my feet, and before I knew it, we were standing in a small chapel, exchanging vows in front of a handful of loved ones. Grandma Rose was there, of course, beaming with pride. My parents attended too, though their smiles seemed a bit forced. Ethan didn't come, citing a vague prior commitment. Jack and I moved into his apartment, a cozy space that quickly became home. His parents, Tom and Ellen, welcomed me with open arms, their warmth a balm to my soul. A year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. The joy that filled me was indescribable. When we announced it to our families, Jack's parents were ecstatic. My parents' reaction was more subdued. Do you know what it is yet? Mom asked immediately. I shook my head. It's too early to tell. As the months passed, their interest in the baby's gender became almost obsessive. When we finally revealed it was a boy, their relief was palpable. A grandson, Dad exclaimed. That's wonderful news, Miranda. I tried not to read too much into their reaction, focusing instead on preparing for our son's arrival. Little Alexander came into the world on a rainy Tuesday, his tiny hand wrapping around my finger as if to say, I'm here, Mom. I've got you. As I held him, I vowed to give him all the love and support I'd craved as a child. While I was navigating new motherhood, Ethan continued to drift. He picked up odd jobs here and there, but nothing stuck. He was still living at home, much to our parents' poorly concealed frustration. During a rare family dinner, I tried to broach the subject gently. You know, Ethan, there's an entry-level position opening up at my company. I could put in a good word. Miranda, Mom cut me off sharply. Your brother doesn't need your charity. He's just taking his time to find the right opportunity. Dad nodded in agreement. You were lucky, Miranda. Things just fell into place for you. Not everyone has it so easy. I blinked, stunned. Lucky? The sleepless nights studying, the years of juggling work and school, the constant struggle to prove my worth, none of that felt like luck. But I swallowed my retort, not wanting to start an argument. As I looked around the table, at my parents' defensive postures, Ethan's sullen expression, and little Alexander babbling happily in his high chair, I realized something profound. Family isn't just about blood. It's about support, understanding, and unconditional love. And sometimes, the family you choose can fill the gaps left by the one you're born into. As Alexander's 5th birthday approached, we planned a trip to my hometown, Jack, our son, and me. Our first stop was Grandma Rose's house. We spent a wonderful afternoon with her, Alexander captivated by her stories and the old photos she showed him. As we were leaving, Grandma pulled me aside. Your parents have been struggling, she said softly. Maybe it's time to let bygones be bygones? The next day, we stood on my parents' doorstep. Mom answered, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Dad was in his armchair, Ethan slouched on the couch. They both looked up as we entered. After awkward greetings and stilted small talk, Mom cleared her throat. Miranda, we need to talk to you about something. What followed was a halting explanation of their financial troubles. Medical bills, Ethan's ongoing unemployment, the lingering college debt, it had all piled up. We hate to ask, Dad said, not meeting my eyes, but we could use some help. I glanced at Jack, who gave me a subtle nod. Despite everything, these were my parents. Of course, I heard myself say. I can send some money each month. The relief on their faces was palpable. We worked out the details, $1,500 a month, with the understanding that they could reach out if emergencies arose. Over the next 2 years, I faithfully sent the money each month. There were occasional requests for extra help, a broken water heater, unexpected car repairs, which I always obliged. It felt good to be able to help, to maybe finally earn their approval. When Thanksgiving rolled around, we found ourselves back in my childhood home. The house was full, aunts, uncles, cousins, and Grandma Rose all crowded around the dining table. As we ate, Mom and Dad couldn't stop talking about Ethan. He's been at his new job for 3 months now, Mom beamed. Such a hard worker. Dad chimed in. Did you see the new sofa cushions? Ethan bought those with his first paycheck. So thoughtful of him. I glanced around the room, noting the new curtains, the fresh paint on the walls, the updated appliances in the kitchen. All purchased with the money I'd been sending. But I bit my tongue, not wanting to spoil the mood. Jack squeezed my hand under the table, a silent show of support. Alexander, oblivious to the undercurrents, happily chatted with his cousins. The Thanksgiving dinner continued, the chatter of family filling the air. I was just starting to relax when Alexander tugged at my sleeve. Mom, can I go play in the other room? He asked, his eyes bright with the restlessness of a 5-year-old at a grown-up gathering. I nodded, ruffling his hair. Sure, sweetie. Just don't make too much noise, okay? As Alexander scampered off, I turned back to the conversation. Barely a minute had passed when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced at the screen, confusion furrowing my brow. The caller ID read, Mom. I looked up at my mother, sitting directly across from me at the table. Mom, why are you calling me? She frowned, shaking her head. I'm not calling you, dear. My phone's in the living room. Just then, Alexander reappeared in the doorway, my mother's phone clutched in his small hands. The room fell quiet as all eyes turned to him. Mommy, he said, his voice ringing in the sudden silence. I found Grandma's phone and I wanted to see who she talks to. I saw a funny name, Cash Cow, and clicked on it to see who it would call. Why did it call you, Mommy? What's a cash cow? The words hit me like a physical blow. Cash cow. Is that all I was to them? I looked around the table. My relatives sat frozen, forks halfway to their mouths. Grandma Rose's face was a mask of shock and anger. And my parents, they had gone deathly pale. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Cash cow, I repeated, my voice trembling. Is that what I am to you? My mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. My father couldn't even meet my eyes. Let me tell you all something, I continued, addressing the whole table. For the past 2 years, I've been sending my parents $1,500 every month. When they've asked for extra, I've sent that too. All those new things you've been admiring? The curtains, the appliances, the fresh paint? That was all bought with my money. I could feel tears pricking at my eyes, but I blinked them back. I did this despite years of being treated like I was second best. Despite being sent away as a child, despite having to work my way through college while Ethan got everything handed to him. I did it because I thought maybe, finally, you'd see me. You'd be proud of me. My voice cracked on the last words. But instead, I'm just your cash cow. A resource to be milked dry. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Jack stood up and put his arm around me, a solid presence at my side. Alexander, not fully understanding but sensing the tension, came and wrapped his arms around my legs. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for my parents to say something, anything. An apology, an explanation, even a denial. But what came next shocked me to my core. My mother's face hardened, her eyes flashing with indignation. Well, of course you help us. We gave birth to you, raised you, it's your duty. Don't be so sensitive about a silly phone contact. I felt as if I'd been slapped. Years of pent-up frustration and hurt bubbled to the surface. Duty? Is that what you think this is? Well, let me make this clear, from this day forward, I'm done. No more money, no more help. I'm cutting ties. At the mention of losing financial support, Mom's demeanor changed instantly. Tears sprang to her eyes. How can you be so heartless? After everything we've done for you. She looked around the table, seeking support from our relatives. But to her surprise, and mine, they remained silent. One by one, they looked away from her pleading gaze. Then Grandma Rose spoke up, her voice quivering with anger. Heartless? You dare call Miranda heartless after how you've treated her? Well, let me tell you something, I want nothing more to do with you either. And you can forget about any inheritance. It's all going to Miranda and Alexander. The room erupted into chaos. Mom was sobbing, Dad was trying to calm her down, and Ethan just sat there, looking bewildered. In the midst of it all, I felt Jack's hand on my shoulder, grounding me. I think it's time we left, he said softly. I nodded, suddenly exhausted. We gathered Alexander and our things, said goodbye to Grandma Rose and the other relatives, and walked out without another word to my parents. True to my word, I stopped all financial support. The call started almost immediately, first pleading, then angry, then downright abusive. When the messages turned into threats, I warned them that I'd take legal action if they didn't stop. Eventually, the calls and messages trickled to a stop. Life went on. I focused on my career, on Jack, on raising Alexander. Grandma Rose became an even bigger part of our lives, her love and support a balm to the wound left by my parents' betrayal. Years passed. Through the grapevine, I heard that Ethan had racked up significant debts. My parents, in a last-ditch effort to bail him out, had to sell their house. The three of them ended up in a small apartment across town. When I heard the news, I was surprised to find that I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, not even anger anymore. They had made their choices, just as I had made mine. Today, as I watch Alexander play in our backyard, Jack by my side, and Grandma Rose laughing from her favorite chair on the patio, I realize something profound. I've finally found my place, my worth. And no one can take that away from me. Hey there, I'm Zoe. I've always been good at reading people. It's probably why I became a psychologist. I had my own private practice and spent most of my waking hours helping others sort out their problems. Ironic, right? Considering what happened later. Anyway, there I was, approaching my late 30s, when it hit me like a ton of bricks: I wanted a family. Crazy how that sneaks up on you. My best friend, Sarah, must have sensed my sudden desperation because she offered to set me up with her second cousin. "Come on, Zoe," she said over coffee one day. "He's a great guy. Smart, funny, and he's got a good job. What be you got to lose?" I sighed, stirring my latte absently. "I don't know, Sarah. Blind dates aren't really my thing." She rolled her eyes. "It's not a blind date if I show you his picture first. Besides, you two can chat online before meeting. It's perfect." That's how I found myself friend requesting Mark on social media later that evening. To my surprise, we hit it off right away. Mark was 38, just a year older than me, and he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Our chats were easy, flowing from one topic to the next without any awkward pauses. We chatted for weeks before finally agreeing to meet in person. I was nervous as hell, palms sweating as I waited for him at the coffee shop we'd chosen for our first date. When Mark walked in, I felt my breath catch. He was tall, with kind eyes and a warm smile. He spotted me and waved, making his way over to my table. "Zoe?" he asked, extending his hand. I nodded, returning his smile. "That's me. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Mark." He sat down across from me, and just like that, the nerves melted away. We talked for hours, losing track of time until the barista politely informed us they were closing. As we walked out into the cool evening air, Mark turned to me. "I had a great time, Zoe. Would you like to do this again sometime?" I didn't hesitate. "I'd love to." And just like that, I found myself falling headfirst into a relationship with Mark. We started seeing each other regularly, going on dinner dates, walks in the park, and even a few weekend getaways. As our relationship progressed, I noticed something peculiar about Mark. His phone was constantly buzzing with messages. At first, I didn't think much of it. We all have busy lives, right? But the frequency was unusual, even for a popular guy. One night, as we lay in bed after a nice dinner, his phone lit up for what felt like the 100th time. I couldn't help myself. "Busy night, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Mark glanced at his phone and smiled sheepishly. "Oh, it's just my mom. She likes to check in." I raised an eyebrow. "Your mom? At this hour?" He shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. "Yeah, we're pretty close. She raised me alone after my dad died when I was 5. I had pretty bad bronchial asthma as a kid. There were times she literally saved my life." I listened as Mark opened up about his childhood. The more he talked, the clearer the picture became. His mother wasn't just devoted, she was his entire world. "Sounds like you two have a special bond," I said, choosing my words carefully. Mark nodded enthusiastically. "We do, I owe her everything." As a psychologist, alarm bells were ringing in my head. The relationship Mark described sounded codependent, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I wasn't his therapist, I was his girlfriend. It wasn't my place to analyze their relationship. Weeks turned into months, and soon we'd been dating for nearly a year. Mark was sweet, attentive, and our relationship felt solid. But there was always this nagging feeling in the back of my mind about his relationship with his mother. One day, as we were having lunch at my place, Mark suddenly looked nervous. "Zoe," he began, fidgeting with his napkin. "I'd like you to meet my mom. I think you'll really like her. She's excited to meet you too." The next weekend, I found myself standing outside a modest 2-story house, my palms sweating. Mark squeezed my hand reassuringly as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open, revealing a petite woman with graying hair and Mark's kind eyes. She smiled warmly at us. "You must be Zoe," she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "I'm Helen. Come in, come in." As we settled in the living room, I couldn't help but notice how Helen's eyes never left Mark. She fussed over him, asking if he wanted a drink or a snack, completely ignoring my presence. I watched their interaction, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Helen dominated the conversation, constantly bringing up stories from Mark's childhood or fretting over his health. As we left a few hours later, I felt drained. Mark, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the awkwardness. "So, what did you think?" he asked eagerly as we drove away. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Your mom clearly loves you very much." Mark beamed. "She's great, isn't she? I knew you'd like her." I forced a smile, not having the heart to burst his bubble. But as we drove back to my place, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something far more complex than a mother's love. 6 months flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was down on one knee, a sparkling ring in his hand. Despite my lingering concerns about his relationship with Helen, I said yes. I was in love, and I truly believed we could work through any issues together. We decided to move in together, into my apartment, of course. As we dove into wedding preparations, I quickly realized this wasn't going to be the fun, exciting experience I'd always imagined. Helen inserted herself into every decision, every detail. It wasn't just the wedding, either. Helen called constantly, always with some crisis that required Mark's immediate attention. One evening, as we were discussing flower arrangements, Mark's phone rang. He answered immediately, his face creasing with concern. "What's wrong, Mom? The sink's leaking? I'll be right there." He hung up and turned to me apologetically. "I've got to go help Mom. Her sink is leaking, and you know how she is with plumbers." This scene repeated itself almost daily. If it wasn't a leaky sink, it was a stubbed toe or a sad mood that only Mark could lift. And if he ever hesitated. "After all I've done for you," Helen's voice would crack over the speakerphone. "I just need a little help. Is that too much to ask?" I couldn't take it anymore. One night, after Mark returned from yet another Helen emergency, I decided to broach the subject. "Mark," I said gently, "I think it might be helpful if we saw a couples therapist. Someone who could help us navigate this situation with your mom. I think her demands are a bit excessive." "Excessive?" Mark's voice rose. "She raised me alone, Zoe. She saved my life multiple times. How can you call that excessive?" I backpedaled, realizing I'd hit a nerve. "I'm not saying she doesn't love you. I'm just worried about the impact on our relationship." Mark softened slightly. "Okay, maybe you're right, but can we do it after the wedding? We're so busy right now, and I don't want to add more stress." I knew I should push harder, insist on addressing this before we tied the knot. But I was exhausted from fighting this invisible battle with Helen. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. The weeks flew by in a whirlwind of cake tastings, dress fittings, and endless phone calls with Helen. Before I knew it, we were just days away from the wedding. Despite the stress, I was excited. My friends had planned a bachelorette party, and I was looking forward to a night of fun without wedding talk or Helen drama. We hit our favorite bar, laughing and dancing. For the first time in months, I felt light, free from the constant tension of planning a wedding under Helen's watchful eye. Then my phone rang. Mark's name flashed on the screen. "Zoe," his voice was tight with panic. "Mom's in the hospital. Her blood pressure spiked. I'm heading there now." I quickly explained the situation to my friends and called a taxi. The ride to the hospital felt endless, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. The moment Helen saw me, her face crumpled. "Oh," she moaned, dramatically covering her face with her hands. "It's you. My blood pressure, it's your fault. All this wedding stress." I froze, shocked by the accusation. Helen peeked through her fingers, her eyes narrowing at me. I can't handle this right now, my poor heart. Mark turned to me, his expression apologetic but firm. Zoe, could you wait outside? Just for a bit? Stunned, I nodded and walked out, collapsing into a chair in the hallway. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, nurses and doctors bustling past me. Finally, I stood up, determined to understand what was happening. I approached the nurse's station, using every ounce of my professional demeanor. Excuse me, I said to the doctor charting nearby. I'm Zoe, Helen Johnson's future daughter-in-law. Could you tell me about her condition? The doctor looked up, his expression neutral. Mrs. Johnson's blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously so. We're monitoring her, but there's no immediate cause for concern. I took a deep breath, weighing my next words carefully. Doctor, I'm a psychologist. And I'm concerned that Mrs. Johnson might be dealing with some psychological issues. Has anyone evaluated her mental health? The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an interesting observation. We haven't done a psychological evaluation, but given what you're saying, it might be worth looking into. I'll make a note to refer her for an assessment. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate your help. Returning to my seat in the hallway, I waited a bit longer, hoping Mark would emerge. But as the minutes ticked by, I realized he wasn't coming out anytime soon. Defeated, I sent him a text, heading home. Call me when you can. I called another taxi and went back to our apartment. My phone buzzed with messages from my friends, asking where I'd disappeared to. I sent a quick apology, telling them to enjoy the rest of the night without me. It was past midnight when I heard the key in the lock. Mark shuffled in, looking exhausted. Hey, he said softly. You're still up. I sat up, trying to keep the hurt and anger out of my voice. How's your mom? He sighed, sinking into the armchair across from me. She's okay. They're keeping her overnight for observation. I stayed until she fell asleep. She was so upset, Zoe. She kept asking me not to leave her alone. I couldn't hold back anymore. Mark, do you really think that's all it is? Don't you see what's happening here? He looked at me, his eyes pleading. Zoe, please, not tonight. Can we just go to bed? I'm exhausted. I wanted to argue, to make him see reason. But looking at his tired face, I knew it was pointless. So I nodded, swallowing my frustration. The big day finally arrived. Mark pulled me aside just before the ceremony and took a deep breath. Look, I know things have been tense with Mom lately. But I've made some arrangements to keep her happy today. I just need you to go along with it, please? My heart sank. What kind of arrangements? Mark explained quickly. Helen had a special menu prepared for her, citing non-existent allergies. She'd be seated next to Mark at the head table, not with the other parents. The DJ had a list of her favorite songs to play. And, Mark added hesitantly, she wants to make a speech. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 in my head. Okay, I said finally. For you, for us. He kissed me gratefully, and I returned to my bridesmaids, plastering on a smile. The ceremony itself was beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, seeing Mark's face light up, I felt a surge of love that pushed all my doubts aside. For a moment, it was just us. The reception was an experience. True to Mark's word, Helen held court at our table, regaling everyone with stories of Mark's childhood. She barely acknowledged my presence, except to occasionally pat my hand condescendingly. When it came time for speeches, I watched in horror as Helen tottered up to the microphone, wine glass in hand. My dear friends and family, she began, her voice wavering. We're here to celebrate my only son's wedding day. She went on for what felt like hours, talking about Mark's childhood, his accomplishments, and how she'd sacrificed everything for him. I was mentioned exactly once, as an afterthought. As she finally wrapped up, Helen raised her glass. To my son, and his wife. May they be as happy as Mark and I have always been. I downed my champagne in one gulp. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We danced, we laughed, we cut the cake. And through it all, Helen hovered, always ready to interject herself into every moment. The wedding is over, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, nothing changed. Helen called every day, sometimes multiple times a day. There was always some crisis, some reason she needed Mark's immediate attention. One day, as he grabbed his keys, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mark, we need to talk about this. It's not healthy, for any of us." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, you're right. We should see someone. A therapist, like you suggested. Let's look into it this weekend." But when the weekend came, there was always some reason to postpone. Helen needed help with her grocery shopping. The lawn needed mowing. The cat needed to go to the vet. And so it went, week after week. Empty promises and endless excuses. 3 months into our marriage, I was at my wit's end. The constant intrusions from Helen, Mark's unwillingness to set boundaries, and the strain on our relationship were taking their toll. When my vacation time came around, I saw it as a golden opportunity. "Mark," I said one evening, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "let's go on a honeymoon. Just the two of us, away from everything. What do you say?" To my surprise and relief, Mark's face lit up. "That sounds amazing, Zoe. Where do you want to go?" We spent the next hour excitedly planning a tropical getaway. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This was our chance to reconnect, to remember why we fell in love in the first place. "I'll take care of everything," Mark promised. "The flights, the hotel, all of it. And when we get back, I promise we'll deal with the situation with Mom. Maybe look into that therapy we talked about." The day of our departure arrived, and I was practically bouncing with excitement as we drove to the airport. Mark seemed a bit distracted, but I chalked it up to pre-flight jitters. As we approached the check-in counter, Mark handed me my boarding pass. I glanced at it, then did a double take. "Economy?" I asked, confused. "I thought we were flying together." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, about that. I had some credit card bonuses I could use, but there was only enough for one first-class ticket. I figured since I'm taller, it made sense for me to take it. It'll save us money overall." I stared at him, hurt and bewildered. "But, it's our honeymoon. Couldn't we have both flown economy and sat together?" "Come on, Zoe," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. It's just a few hours." Swallowing my disappointment, I tried one last time. "Okay, well, can I at least come to the first-class lounge with you before the flight? We could pay extra." "No," Mark cut me off quickly. "The ticket's in my name. They won't let you in. Look, I've got to go check in. I'll see you on the other side, okay?" Before I could respond, he was gone, wheeling his suitcase towards the first-class check-in. Feeling deflated, I made my way through security and to the regular boarding lounge. As I sat there, trying to salvage my excitement for the trip, a familiar figure caught my eye. There, just outside the first-class lounge, I saw a flash of graying hair and a floral dress that looked suspiciously like something Helen would wear. My heart started racing. Was I imagining things? Had the stress of the past few months finally made me paranoid? But Mark's strange behavior, his insistence on flying first class alone, his refusal to let me into the lounge, it all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. Before I could talk myself out of it, I marched up to the first-class lounge desk. "Excuse me," I said, pulling out my credit card. "I'd like to purchase access to the lounge, please." The attendant looked skeptical, but processed my payment. As she handed me the access card, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might find. I pushed open the door to the lounge, my eyes scanning the plush seats and buffet tables. And there, in a quiet corner by the window, sat Mark and Helen, heads close together over cups of coffee. They looked comfortable. like they were embarking on their own little adventure. I took a deep breath and strode towards Mark and Helen, my heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. They both looked up as I approached, and I saw the color drain from Mark's face. "Zoe," he exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "What are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I replied, my voice ice cold. "Care to explain why you're here with your mother instead of your wife?" Mark glanced nervously around the lounge. "Zoe, please," he said in a low voice. "Let's not do this here. I can explain everything after we land, I promise." Before I could respond, Helen chimed in, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Oh, Zoe dear, what a surprise. Mark and I are just about to take off for a lovely first-class trip together. Isn't that nice? But what are you doing in this lounge?" Mark stepped between us, his face a mask of guilt and fear. "Zoe, I'm sorry. The truth is, there were enough bonus points for 2 first-class tickets. I thought Mom deserved a nice trip, and what about me, Mark?" I practically shouted, no longer caring about the scene we were causing. "I'm your wife. We're supposed to be starting our life together, but instead, you're jetting off with Mommy dearest while I'm shoved in economy like an afterthought." The lounge had gone completely silent. Every eye was on us, but I was beyond caring. "Do you have any idea what it's been like these past few months?" I continued, years of frustration pouring out. "The constant calls, the emergencies, the way you always put her first. And now this? How could you do this to me?" Mark reached out to touch my arm, but I jerked away. "Zoe, please," he pleaded. "You need to calm down. We can work this out. Once we're on vacation, we'll have time to talk, to get closer. We can fix this, I promise." I stared at him, suddenly feeling very calm and very, very tired. "Fix this?" I repeated quietly. "Mark, there's nothing left to fix. I'm going home and I'm filing for divorce." Mark's jaw dropped. "Divorce? Zoe, you can't be serious." But Helen cut him off, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She stood up and linked her arm through Mark's. "Well, if that's how you feel, dear, I think it's for the best. Come along, Mark. We don't want to miss our flight." I watched in stunned silence as Helen led Mark away. He looked back at me once, his expression a mix of regret and relief, before they disappeared through the boarding gate. For a moment, I just stood there, feeling the weight of dozens of curious stares. Then, without a word, I turned on my heel and walked out of the lounge. As I made my way through the airport, my mind was oddly blank. I should have been crying, screaming, feeling something. But all I felt was a strange sense of liberation. I spent the next few hours gathering Mark's belongings. Clothes, books, the silly knickknacks his mother always bought him. I packed it all up methodically, my mind oddly calm. When I was done, I called a courier service and had everything sent to a nearby storage facility. The next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was the right decision, I knew it in my bones. Instead of wallowing, I decided to use my vacation time for myself. I redecorated the apartment, erasing all traces of Mark. I reconnected with old friends, started yoga classes, and spent long hours reading books I'd been meaning to get to for years. A month passed, and my phone buzzed with a message from Mark. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. "Zoe, please, can we talk?" I typed out a brief response. "Storage facility number 247. Access code 8891. Your things are there. Divorce papers have been sent to your mother's address. Please sign and return them." Then I blocked his number. Returning to work was like a breath of fresh air. I threw myself into my practice with renewed energy. My experiences, painful as they were, had given me new insights into codependent relationships. I channeled this knowledge into a series of research papers, carefully anonymizing the details. To my surprise and delight, these papers caught the attention of the psychology department at the local college. They invited me to give a guest lecture, which turned into an offer for a part-time teaching position. It was at the college that I met James. He was a fellow professor in the psychology department, tall, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. We bonded over shared research interests and a mutual love of terrible puns. As the weeks passed, James and I grew closer. He was everything Mark wasn't: independent, respectful of boundaries, and wonderfully self-assured. He had a teenage daughter from a previous marriage, and watching him balance his role as a father with his career and our budding relationship was a revelation. One evening, as we were grading papers together, my phone buzzed with a message from Sarah, my old friend who had originally set me up with Mark. "Hey Zoe," it read. "Thought you should know, Mark's still living with Helen. If anything, they seem even closer now. I'm so sorry for my part in all this. Hope you're doing okay." I stared at the message for a moment, then set my phone aside. James looked up, concern in his eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. I smiled, realizing that for the first time in a long time, I truly was all right. "Yeah," I said. "Everything's fine." And it was. Mark and Helen's relationship was no longer my problem. I had my own life to live, my own path to follow. I remember my childhood like it was yesterday. The smell of my dad's aftershave, the sound of his keys jingling as he came home from work. I'm Alice, and this is my story. I was born into what you'd call an ordinary family. Mom, Dad, and me. But from the get-go, it was clear who my favorite was. Dad. He was my hero, my everything. Every day, I'd wait by the window, my nose pressed against the glass, waiting for his car to pull up. The moment I saw him, I'd bolt to the door, ready to jump into his arms. "There's my little princess," he'd say, scooping me up and spinning me around. I'd giggle, burying my face in his neck, breathing in that familiar scent that meant safety and love. Mom? Well, she was there. Physically, at least. Emotionally? Not so much. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with this weird expression, like I was some kind of burden she hadn't signed up for. But Dad made up for it. Every evening, rain or shine, we'd go for walks. He'd point out different trees, teach me about birds, or just let me ramble on about my day at kindergarten. Bedtime was the best. Dad would tuck me in, pull out a book, and transport us both to magical worlds. His voice would change for each character, making me laugh or gasp in all the right places. But when I turned 5, everything changed. I remember the day they sat me down. Mom looked relieved, Dad looked heartbroken. "Alice, honey," Dad started, his voice cracking. "Mommy and Daddy, we're not going to be living together anymore." I didn't understand at first. "Like when you go on business trips?" I asked. Mom cut in, her voice flat. "No, Alice, we're getting divorced. But don't worry, you'll be staying with your father. It's better this way." I looked at Dad, tears welling up in his eyes. He pulled me close, and I could feel him shaking. He said everything would be okay, but even at 5, I knew, nothing would ever be the same again. The divorce hit me hard, but Dad did his best to make things normal. We moved to a new neighborhood with a good school nearby. I remember the day we arrived at our new house. "What do you think, Alice?" Dad asked, his eyes hopeful. I looked at the unfamiliar building and felt a lump in my throat. "It's big," I managed to say. Dad knelt down beside me. "I know it's different, sweetheart. But we'll make it our home together, okay?" I nodded, trying to be brave for him. The new school was okay, I guess. I made some friends, but I missed my old life. Dad tried to keep our routines, walks in the evening, bedtime stories, but something had changed. There was a sadness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Mom? She became like a ghost in my life. She'd call sometimes, her voice distant and distracted. "How's school, Alice?" she'd ask, but I could tell she didn't really care about the answer. Once in a while, she'd take me for a weekend. It was always awkward, like we were strangers forced to spend time together. I'd come home to Dad, relief washing over me as I stepped through the door. One day, when I was 6, Dad sat me down with a serious look on his face. "Alice, honey, I've got some news," he said, fidgeting with his hands. "I've met someone. Her name is Sarah, and, well, we're getting married. Sarah is nice, I promise. You'll like her." I didn't want to like her. I wanted things to stay as they were, just me and Dad. But life had other plans. Sarah moved in, and suddenly our quiet house was full of noise and change. She tried to be nice, always smiling too brightly, asking too many questions. "Alice, sweetie, what would you like for dinner?" she'd ask, her voice syrupy sweet. "Whatever," I'd mutter, retreating to my room. Then came the biggest change of all. I was in the living room, watching TV, when Dad and Sarah came in, both grinning from ear to ear. "Alice, we have wonderful news," Sarah gushed. "You're going to be a big sister." I looked at Dad, hoping to see some sign that this was a joke. But he was beaming, his hand on Sarah's stomach. "Isn't it great, princess?" he said. "You'll have a little brother or sister to play with." I forced a smile, but inside, I felt like screaming. A baby? How could he do this? Didn't he love me enough? Months passed, and Sarah's belly grew bigger. Dad spent more and more time fussing over her, buying baby things, talking about names. I felt like I was fading into the background. The day the baby was born, I was left with a neighbor. When Dad finally came to get me, he looked exhausted but happy. "Come meet your baby brother, Alice," he said. At the hospital, I peered into the crib at the tiny, red-faced bundle. I looked at the baby, then at Dad, who was gazing at his new son with such love it made my heart hurt. Life changed fast after Tommy was born. Dad was completely wrapped up in his new family, and I felt like I was fading into the background. The walks, the bedtime stories, the special moments, they all disappeared, replaced by diaper changes and late-night feedings. Sarah, my stepmother, barely hid her annoyance with me. I'd catch her giving me these looks, like I was some unwanted houseguest who'd overstayed my welcome. One day, I overheard her talking to Dad in the kitchen. "John, why don't we see if Alice's mother wants her back? It might be better for everyone." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Dad's voice was sharp when he replied, "Absolutely not. Alice is my daughter, and this is her home. I expect you to treat her like your own." After that, Sarah was careful not to say anything outright mean to me, but the damage was done. I knew where I stood in her eyes, a burden, an obstacle to her perfect little family. As the years went by, I learned to fend for myself. Dad was always busy with Tommy, teaching him to walk, to talk, attending his little league games. I grew up in the shadows, becoming fiercely independent out of necessity. High school graduation came and went. Dad, true to his word, paid for my college tuition. "It's from the money your mom's been sending all these years," he explained. "I've been saving it for your education." I was surprised. I'd assumed Mom had just disappeared from my life completely. But I was grateful for the chance to get away, to start fresh in a new city. College flew by. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make something of myself. I graduated with a degree in financial management, feeling proud and accomplished. But when I returned home, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. The house felt different, smaller somehow. Sarah greeted me with a tight smile. "Oh, Alice, you're back. We weren't expecting you so soon." I lugged my bags upstairs, only to find my childhood bedroom completely transformed. Where my bed used to be, there was now a treadmill. My desk had been replaced by a huge TV and gaming console. The walls, once covered in my posters, were now bare. "Tommy needed a rec room," Sarah explained, not even trying to sound apologetic. "You can sleep on the couch in the living room. It's just temporary, right?" I stood there, staring at the stranger my room had become, feeling more out of place than ever. Right, I mumbled. Temporary. The job search was tough, but I finally landed an entry-level position at a local firm. The pay wasn't great, but it was a start. Every night, I'd scour apartment listings, looking for something, anything, I could afford. Maybe you could find a roommate, Dad suggested one evening, in a rare moment of attention. Split the rent? I nodded, adding another search parameter to my list. But decent, affordable apartments with potential roommates were hard to come by. So, I stayed. Every morning, I'd wake up on that uncomfortable couch, tiptoe around Tommy's toys scattered across the living room floor, and head to work. Every evening, I'd come back to Sarah's cold stares and Dad's distracted nods. Months dragged on, and I was still stuck in limbo, sleeping on the couch and searching for a way out. Tommy had started high school, and suddenly the house was abuzz with excitement, but not for me. "John, darling," Sarah cooed one evening, her voice sickly sweet. "Don't you think Tommy needs a car? All his friends are driving now." I nearly choked on my dinner. Tommy was barely 15, for crying out loud. Dad, ever the pushover when it came to his precious son, nodded. "You're right, honey. We'll go car shopping this weekend." And just like that, Tommy got a shiny new car. Never mind that he couldn't legally drive it yet. I bit my tongue, trying to swallow the bitterness rising in my throat. My birthday rolled around a few weeks later. For once, I decided to ask for something. I approached Dad cautiously. "Hey, Dad? I was wondering, could I maybe get a laptop for my birthday? I could pick up some freelance work online, make some extra money." Before Dad could respond, Sarah swooped in, her face twisted with anger. "A laptop? Are you serious, Alice? You're already living here rent-free, eating our food, and now you want more?" Her voice dripped with venom. "You're nothing but a money-grubbing freeloader." I stood there, shocked into silence, as she continued her tirade. "Have you no shame? Your father just paid for your entire college education, and here you are, asking for more expensive gifts." She was on a roll now, tears springing to her eyes in a dramatic display. What about Tommy's future? At this rate, he'll never be able to go to college, because his greedy sister is bleeding us dry. "Sarah, that's enough." Dad's voice cut through her performance. "We have a separate account for Tommy's college fund. It's all taken care of, so please, calm down." Sarah huffed and stormed out of the room, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. Dad sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I'm sorry about that, Alice. We'll talk about the laptop later, okay?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As soon as I could, I escaped to the backyard, needing some air. Sitting on the old swing set, I let the tears I'd been holding back fall freely. Sarah's words echoed in my head, each one a dagger to my heart. I wiped my eyes, a new resolve settling over me. I wouldn't ask for anything ever again. I'd find a way to make it on my own, without their help or their judgment. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, life decided to prove me wrong. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when all hell broke loose. Dad burst into the living room, his face red with fury. "Where is it?" he bellowed, making me jump. "Where's my damn money?" Sarah and Tommy came running, eyes wide with shock. I sat there, frozen, as Dad continued his tirade. "Someone's been using my card. The one for Tommy's college fund." He was pacing now, hands shaking. "Jewelry stores, electronics. Who the hell's been spending my money?" His eyes landed on me, narrowing with suspicion. "Alice, did you take my cards? Have you been in my wallet?" I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. "What? No, Dad, I would never." But he wasn't listening. He was on a rampage, tearing through the room like a tornado. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "John, check her backpack. It's right there." Before I could protest, Dad grabbed my bag. I watched in horror as he dumped its contents onto the couch. Books, papers, pens, and there, gleaming in the midst of it all, was a brand new laptop. The room fell silent. I stared at the laptop, my mind reeling. I hadn't bought this. Dad's voice was dangerously low. You thieving little. Dad, no. I didn't do this. I pleaded, panic rising in my throat. I don't know where that came from. And jewelry? Why would I buy jewelry? Call the police. Check the store cameras. You'll see it wasn't me. But my words fell on deaf ears. Sarah stepped forward, her face a mask of righteous indignation. John, can't you see? She has no respect for you. She's lying to your face, even with the evidence right in front of her. She turned to me, eyes glinting with triumph. We should have known you'd do something like this. Always wanting more, never satisfied with what you have. Dad's next words hit me like a physical blow. Get out. What? I whispered, not believing what I was hearing. Get out of my house, he roared. You ungrateful. I never want to see you again. Get your things and leave now. Numbly, I gathered what I could. Clothes, toiletries, my phone charger. It all went into a duffel bag I found in the closet. The whole time, Dad stood there, watching me with a mixture of anger and disgust that broke my heart. As I headed for the door, Sarah's parting shot hit me. We should have done this years ago. Good riddance to bad rubbish. The door slammed behind me, and just like that, I was alone. Homeless. Accused of a crime I didn't commit. As the reality of my situation sank in, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. The house behind me had stopped being a home long ago. Maybe this was the push I needed to truly start my own life. That first night after being kicked out was a blur. I found myself in a dingy hostel, clutching my duffel bag like a lifeline. Sleep eluded me as I lay on the lumpy mattress, my mind racing with unanswered questions and fear for the future. The next day at work, I must have looked as lost as I felt. My colleague, Jessica, cornered me in the break room. All right, spill it. What's going on with you? She demanded, her concern evident. Before I knew it, I was pouring out the whole sordid story. Jessica listened, her eyes widening with each new detail. That's insane, she said when I finished. Then, without missing a beat, move in with me. I've been looking for a roommate anyway. We can split the rent. It'll be perfect. And just like that, I had a lifeline. I moved in with Jessica that weekend, grateful beyond words for her kindness. 2 years passed in a whirlwind. I threw myself into work, determined to prove to myself, and everyone else, that I could make it on my own. I didn't speak to Dad at all during this time. The pain of his betrayal was still too raw. Mom tried to reach out a few times, but our conversations were strained. It was clear Dad had told her about the alleged theft. Her disappointment was palpable, even over the phone. Eventually, those calls stopped too. But life has a way of moving forward, whether you're ready or not. I got promoted at work, started earning enough to consider my own place. I picked up new hobbies, yoga, painting, anything to keep my mind occupied. I even started dating again, though nothing serious. Finally, I took the plunge and rented my own apartment. It was small, but it was mine. No judgmental stares, no walking on eggshells. Just peace and independence. I was just settling into my new routine when the unexpected happened. There was a knock at my door one Saturday afternoon. I opened it, and there stood Dad. He looked older, more haggard than I remembered. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. Can I come in? He choked out. Your mother gave me the address. Alice, I need to talk to you. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to throw him out like he'd done to me. But another part, a part one thought I'd buried, wanted desperately to hear what he had to say. Dad took a deep breath. I found out what really happened 2 years ago, he began, his voice shaking. It wasn't you. It was Sarah. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. What? He nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. She framed you. She's the one who took my credit cards, who bought all that stuff. I found jewelry, clothes, all hidden away in her things. Price tags still on them and everything. I sank onto the couch, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Dad's words washed over me, each one a mix of vindication and reopened wounds. I sat there, stunned, as Dad continued his story. His voice trembled with a mix of anger and regret as he recounted the events that led to this moment. After I found the jewelry, I started paying closer attention, he said, running a hand through his graying hair. One night, I caught Sarah red-handed, going through my wallet. She was taking my credit cards, Alice. I felt a lump form in my throat. All this time, I'd been right. But the vindication tasted bitter. Dad went on, his words tumbling out faster now. I confronted her, and it all came spilling out. She's been shopping compulsively for years. At first, she said it was all for Tommy. But now? She's maxed out credit cards, taken out loans, all for stuff we don't need. I shook my head, disbelief warring with a perverse sense of satisfaction. And the laptop? The one you found in my bag? Dad's face crumpled. She planted it there. Bought it with my card and slipped it into your things. God, Alice, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. The apology hung in the air between us, heavy and insufficient. I told her she needed help, Dad continued. Begged her to see a therapist, to get treatment for her shopping addiction. But she refused. Said there was nothing wrong with her. I could picture it, Sarah, defiant and unapologetic. Just like she'd been the day they kicked me out. And then, Dad's voice dropped to a near whisper, she said she was right to frame you. That she'd do it again if she had the chance. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the couch, steadying myself. That was it for me, Dad said. I filed for divorce the next day. Kicked her out of the house. I couldn't live with someone who'd hurt my daughter like that. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. Alice, I know I don't deserve it, but please, can you forgive me? I was blind, and stupid, and I hurt you so badly. I'm so sorry. I stared at him, this man who had once been my hero. The father who'd read me bedtime stories and taught me to ride a bike. The same father who'd thrown me out without a second thought, who'd believed the worst of me so easily. For a moment, I was that scared, heartbroken girl again, standing on the sidewalk with nowhere to go. The pain of that betrayal washed over me anew. Dad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't forgive you. Not now, maybe not ever. You didn't just kick me out. You believed I could do something so terrible. You didn't even try to hear my side. And for 2 years, Dad, you didn't call, didn't check if I was okay. Dad nodded, tears streaming down his face. I understand, he choked out. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I needed you to know the truth. I stood up, suddenly needing space. Thank you for telling me, but I think you should go now. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, emotions overwhelming me. The truth was out, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like reopening a wound that had never really healed. After Dad left, I thought I'd finally have peace. But life had other plans. My phone started ringing incessantly, Mom, trying to play peacemaker. Alice, honey, she'd plead, your father is truly sorry. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive him? Each call left me more frustrated than the last. Mom, please. I'm not ready. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. But she wouldn't let up. One evening, I opened my door to find both my parents standing there. What are you doing here? I demanded, anger bubbling up inside me. Mom pushed past me into the apartment, Dad trailing behind looking sheepish. Alice, this has gone on long enough, she started, her voice stern. Your father made a mistake, but he's apologized. You have no right to hold this grudge. Think of all the good things he's done for you. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No right? He kicked me out. He believed I was a thief. Where was all this support when I was sleeping on a friend's couch, trying to rebuild my life? Mom opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. No, I'm done. Both of you, please leave. And don't come back. If you keep pushing this, I'll get a restraining order. I mean it. The shock on their faces would have been comical if the situation wasn't so painful. Mom looked like she wanted to yell, but Dad put a hand on her arm. We understand, Alice, he said quietly. We'll go. But I'll be here when you're ready. If you're ever ready. As the door closed behind them, I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. I sank onto my couch, desperate for some peace to heal. Weeks passed. Life went on. I threw myself into work, finding solace in the mundane routine of everyday life. One day, while grabbing coffee, I spotted a familiar face, Sarah, my ex-stepmother. She was leaving a casino, phone pressed to her ear. I know I owe you, I overheard her say, but I'm sure I'll win it back this time. Just need a little more time. I ducked out of sight, a mix of pity and satisfaction washing over me. Her actions had cost her everything, yet she was still in denial. Tommy, my stepbrother, occasionally sent me text messages. Short, awkward exchanges that never went deep. He was in college now, trying to forge his own path. Like me, he seemed to be keeping his distance from the family drama. Months turned into a year. I met someone, Mark. Kind, funny, understanding Mark. As our relationship grew serious, he asked about my family. I told him everything. Wow, he said, holding me close. You've been through so much. Whatever you decide about your parents, I'm here for you. Now, as I sit here twirling the engagement ring on my finger, I'm faced with a decision I never thought I'd have to make. Our wedding is months away, and I still don't know if I want my parents there. Part of me wants to extend an olive branch, to see if we can build something new from the ashes of our old relationship. Another part is terrified of letting them back in, of making myself vulnerable again. I look at the save the date cards on my coffee table, 2 envelopes set aside, one for Mom, one for Dad. My pen hovers over them, indecision paralyzing me. In the end, I set the pen down. I'm not ready to make this decision yet, and that's okay. I've learned that healing takes time, and forgiveness can't be forced. The name's Rachel, and I'm the oldest of 2 daughters. From as far back as I can remember, I was the serious one, the independent one. My sister Lily? She was the complete opposite. Growing up, our house was always filled with noise. Lily's laughter, Mom and Dad's doting words, the constant buzz of the latest pop songs. Me? I preferred the quiet corners, nose buried in a book or scribbling away at my homework. Birthdays and holidays were a stark reminder of how different Lily and I were. While she'd tear through her gifts, squealing with delight at the latest trendy clothes or gadgets, I'd carefully set aside the money I received. What are you saving for this time, Ratch? Dad would ask, a hint of pride in his voice that never quite reached his eyes. A laptop for studying, I'd reply. The library computers are always full. He'd nod, but I could see the disconnect. They never quite understood why I didn't want the things other girls my age did. Lily, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of ever-changing styles and demands. Mom, did you see the new iPhone? Everyone at school has one. I need it. And just like that, she'd have it. No questions asked, no saving required. I remember the day I finally bought my laptop. I'd saved for months, researching the best model for my needs. When I brought it home, I was bursting with pride. Look, I finally got it, I announced at dinner. Mom glanced up from her plate. That's nice, dear. Oh, Lily, tell us about your day at the mall. And just like that, the conversation shifted. Lily launched into a detailed description of her latest shopping spree, and my achievement faded into the background. It wasn't that they didn't love me. I knew they did, in their own way. But Lily was the sun in our family's solar system, and I was a distant planet, quietly orbiting on my own path. As we grew older, the differences only became more pronounced. While Lily experimented with wild hairstyles and the latest fashion trends, I stuck to my practical ponytail and comfortable jeans. The library became my second home, a quiet sanctuary where I could focus on my goals without distraction. When it came time for college, I threw myself into applications with the same determination I'd shown throughout high school. I spent countless nights perfecting my essays, researching scholarships, and studying for entrance exams. The day I received my acceptance letter, along with a full scholarship, was one of the proudest moments of my life. I burst into the kitchen, waving the letter. "Mom, Dad, I got in. Full ride." Mom looked up from where she was helping Lily with her makeup. "Oh, that's nice, dear." "Lily, hold still, I'm trying to get this eyeliner perfect." Dad glanced over his newspaper. "Good job, Rachel." We expected nothing less. Their lukewarm response stung, but I was used to it. I retreated to my room, clutching the letter to my chest. This was my ticket out, my chance to prove myself. Meanwhile, Lily barely scraped through high school. The day she brought home her mediocre report card, I expected our parents to finally show some disappointment. Instead, they rallied around her. "Oh, sweetie, don't worry about it," Mom cooed, stroking Lily's hair. "College isn't for everyone. You're talented in so many other ways." Dad nodded in agreement. "That's right, princess. You'll find your path." I couldn't believe my ears. "Are you kidding me?" She barely passed. Mom shot me a sharp look. "Rachel, don't be cruel. Your sister has other gifts." I bit my tongue and retreated once again. It was clear that no matter what I achieved, Lily would always be the favorite. College was a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued hard work and ambition. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make the most of this opportunity. One day, during my sophomore year, I got a call from home. It was Lily, her voice bubbly with excitement. "Rach, guess what? I'm thinking of taking some beauty courses. Mom and Dad think it's a great idea." I wanted to tell her about the fascinating research project I was working on, about the internship I'd landed for the summer. But I knew she wouldn't care. As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and determination. I was on my own path, and I was going to make it count. The years flew by. While Lily flitted from one beauty course to another, never quite finishing anything, I graduated with honors. I landed a job at a prestigious company before the ink was dry on my diploma. The day I moved into my own apartment was bittersweet. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I thought about how different my life was from Lily's. She was still living at home, being pampered by our parents. But I was standing on my own 2 feet, ready to take on the world. My first few months at work were a whirlwind. I worked longer hours than anyone else, determined to prove myself. My dedication didn't go unnoticed. Within a year, I was promoted to team leader. I called home to share the news. Mom answered, "Oh, Rachel, that's nice. But guess what? Lily's met the most wonderful boy. He comes from such a good family. We're all so excited." As she rattled on about Lily's new boyfriend, my promotion faded into the background. I hung up feeling deflated but more determined than ever. If my family couldn't appreciate my achievements, I'd just have to achieve even more. I threw myself into my work like a woman possessed. Days blurred into nights, weekends became just another opportunity to get ahead. My dedication paid off. I got another promotion, then another. Before I knew it, I was head of the department, the youngest in the company's history. Mr. Thompson, the owner, called me into his office one day. "Rachel, your work has been exceptional. We've never had someone rise through the ranks so quickly." I beamed with pride. "Thank you, sir. I love what I do." He smiled. "It shows. That's why I want to offer you something special. We have a program for our top employees, a chance to buy an apartment at a significant discount. You've more than earned it." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and planning. When I finally got the keys, I felt like I was walking on air. I decided to throw a housewarming party, a chance to celebrate my success with the people who mattered most. I didn't have much furniture yet, so I bought some inexpensive plastic tables and chairs. I arranged everything carefully, making sure the disposable tableware matched the decor. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. The day of the party arrived. My colleagues showed up first, bearing gifts and warm congratulations. Then my family arrived. Mom, Dad, and Lily swept in like a whirlwind. I noticed Lily's eyes darting around, taking in the modest furnishings with a barely concealed smirk. As the evening wore on, I noticed a pattern. Every time one of my colleagues tried to congratulate me or mention my accomplishments, my parents would swiftly change the subject to Lily. "Oh, that reminds me," Mom would say, cutting off my coworker mid-sentence. "Did Rachel tell you about Lily's latest modeling gig? She's just so photogenic." Dad would chime in. "Yes, our Lily was born for the spotlight. Such natural talent." I saw the confused and slightly horrified looks on my colleagues' faces. I wanted to sink into the floor. Lily, for her part, basked in the attention. "Oh, Mom, stop it," she'd say with a giggle, clearly loving every moment. Finally, mercifully, my family left. As soon as the door closed behind them, my coworker Sarah turned to me, her eyes wide. "Rachel, what the hell was that?" she asked, her voice low and concerned. I shrugged, trying to play it off. "Oh, that's just how they are." Another colleague, Mark, shook his head. "No, Rachel, that's not normal. Are you okay? Do you need help?" I felt a lump forming in my throat. Their concern was touching, but also embarrassing. "Guys, really, it's fine. I'm used to it. Who wants another drink?" As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear them whispering, their concern palpable. I blinked back tears, determined not to let them see how much my family's behavior had affected me. After the housewarming fiasco, I threw myself back into work with renewed vigor. Months flew by, and slowly but surely, I transformed my apartment into a space that truly felt like home. Every piece of furniture, every splash of color on the walls was a testament to my hard work and independence. One sunny Saturday, I decided to treat myself to something I'd been eyeing for a while, a car. Nothing flashy, just a reliable sedan that would get me from point A to point B. As I drove it home, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was mine, bought with my own money, a symbol of my success. I hadn't planned on telling my family, but news travels fast. The phone rang that evening, and Lily's voice chirped through the speaker. "Rach, I heard you bought a car." "That's nice," she said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. You're really doing this the hard way. All this working and saving, it's so unnecessary." I felt my hackles rise. "What do you mean?" "Well, the main task of a woman is to get married properly, silly. Find a man who'll support you and give you everything you need. Why work yourself to the bone when you could have it all handed to you?" I was speechless for a moment. Was she serious? "Lily, that's not. I want to earn things for myself. I'm proud of what I've accomplished." She laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Rach, always the difficult one. Well, you'll see. I'll show you how it's done." Before I could respond, she had hung up. I stared at the phone, a mix of anger and disbelief swirling in my gut. How could we see the world so differently? A few months later, I got my answer. Lily called, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Rachel, you'll never guess what happened. I'm getting married. His name is Robert. He's absolutely loaded, Rach. His parents are paying for the whole wedding. It's going to be gorgeous." As she rattled off details about dresses and flowers and guest lists, I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. This was what she had been working towards, I realized. This was her version of success. The day of the wedding arrived all too soon. I stood in the grand hall, feeling out of place among the glittering guests. Lily was radiant in her designer gown, and our parents couldn't stop gushing. I sipped my champagne, trying to quell the bitterness rising in my throat. Had they ever looked at me with such pride? Had they ever been this happy for my accomplishments? As the evening wore on, I felt more and more like an outsider. Lily was in her element, charming guests and basking in the attention. Our parents flitted about, proudly introducing themselves as the parents of the bride. As I drove home in my modest car, to my modest apartment that I'd worked so hard for, I couldn't help but wonder, had I made the right choices? Was Lily right? Had I chosen the harder path? But then I thought about my job, my achievements, the sense of pride I felt every time I accomplished something on my own. No, I decided. My path might be harder, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. After Lily's wedding, life settled into a new rhythm. Work kept me busy, but my mother's frequent calls became an unwelcome interruption. Every conversation was the same. "Rachel, darling," Mom would start, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You'll never believe what Lily's been up to." I'd brace myself as she launched into another tale of Lily's fabulous new life. "She's been invited to the most exclusive gatherings. Can you believe it? Our Lily, rubbing elbows with high society." One day, after a particularly trying call, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Mom, that's great for Lily, but don't you want to know what's going on in my life?" There was a pause. "Oh, honey," she said, her tone patronizing. "Of course we care. But you really should learn from your sister. Be more beautiful, get things easily. Why work all day for pennies, when you could have it all?" A few weeks later, an invitation arrived. Lily and Robert were having a housewarming party for their new luxury apartment, a gift from his parents, of course. The night of the party, I stood outside their building, feeling small. I smoothed down my simple dress and took a deep breath before heading in. The apartment was stunning. Every surface gleamed, every piece of furniture looked like it cost more than my yearly salary. My parents were already there, cooing over every detail. I tried to blend into the background, but Lily spotted me. She sauntered over, champagne flute in hand. "Rachel, so glad you could make it," she said, her eyes scanning my outfit critically. "I hope you're taking notes. This is how a housewarming should be done. None of that plastic furniture and disposable dish nonsense like at your place." I felt my cheeks burn. "Lily, that's..." But she was already moving on, leaving me with the sting of her words. The weeks that followed were a parade of Lily's extravagance. She seemed to buy everything in sight, always the most expensive option. Then came the car. I was leaving work one evening when a sleek sports car pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, revealing Lily's smug face. "Like it?" she preened. "Just a little gift from Robert. Thought I'd take it for a spin." I glanced at my reliable but unremarkable sedan. "It's very nice, Lily." She followed my gaze and laughed. "Oh, Rachel. Always settling for less. You'll always be working for others, while I live the good life. Ta-da." 2 years flew by in a blur of spreadsheets, meetings, and promotions. While I climbed the corporate ladder, Lily seemed content to climb from one shopping spree to the next. Our paths couldn't have been more different, but I'd made my peace with it. Or so I thought. It was a regular Tuesday when my world tilted on its axis. Mom called, her voice uncharacteristically shaky. "Rachel, it's Lily. She's back home, Robert left her. He said she was too shallow, too focused on spending his money. Called her stupid, can you believe it? He had her sign a prenup, so she's got nothing." I felt a mix of emotions, shock, concern, and if I'm being honest, a tiny flicker of vindication. I squashed it down immediately, ashamed of myself. "I'm coming over," I said, already grabbing my keys. When I arrived at my parents' house, it was like walking into a war zone. I could hear Lily's screams from the driveway. Inside, it was worse. Lily was in the living room, mascara streaking down her face, her designer clothes torn. She was throwing anything she could get her hands on: vases, picture frames, cushions. "He can't do this to me," she shrieked. "I'm Lily. I'm beautiful. I'm perfect." Mom and Dad fluttered around her, trying to calm her down. "Sweetie, please," Mom pleaded. "We'll figure this out. Daddy will buy you a new dress, won't you, dear?" Dad nodded frantically. "Of course, princess, anything you want." I stood there, watching this scene unfold, feeling like I was in some bizarre alternate reality. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how life was supposed to work, was it? As the days passed, Lily's tantrums didn't subside. She'd cry for hours, then scream, then demand expensive gifts to make herself feel better. Our parents, ever eager to please their favorite, complied with every request. One evening, after a particularly bad episode, I couldn't hold my tongue anymore. "Maybe," I said cautiously, "Lily should consider getting a job? It might help her appreciate the value of money and give her something to focus on besides all this." The room went dead silent. Then all hell broke loose. Lily's face contorted in rage. "A job like you? Slaving away day after day like some peasant?" She burst into tears and ran upstairs, slamming her door so hard the house shook. Before I could process what had happened, Mom and Dad rounded on me. "How dare you?" Mom hissed. "Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you suggest she lower herself to your level?" "But I didn't mean," I tried to explain, but they weren't listening. "Get out," Dad said, his voice cold. "Get out of this house right now." Mom pointed to the door. "Out. And don't come back until you can be supportive of your sister." In a daze, I grabbed my purse and left. As I walked into my apartment, my sanctuary, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness at being rejected by my family, anger at their blindness to Lily's faults, and oddly, a sense of relief. For the first time, I saw clearly how toxic my family dynamic had been all these years. Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Just days after the blowout with my family, I received news that left me speechless. I'd won a company contest. The prize? A 4-month around-the-world cruise. In a moment of weakness, or perhaps hope, I called my parents. Maybe this good news would bridge the gap between us. "Mom, Dad, you won't believe it. I won a cruise around the world." The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, my mother's cold voice cut through. "Rachel, how can you be so selfish? Your sister is going through a terrible time, and you're bragging about vacations?" I felt like I'd been slapped. "I'm not bragging, I just thought." Mom interrupted. "If you had any decency, you'd give that ticket to Lily. She needs a change of scenery. You can stay home and work, like you always do." Something snapped inside me. Years of pent-up frustration came pouring out. "No," I said firmly. "I won this trip. I earned it. I'm not giving it up because Lily made poor life choices. I'm going." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. I packed my bags, put my affairs in order, and on the day of departure, I turned off my phone. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. The cruise was everything I'd dreamed of and more. I watched sunsets in the Mediterranean, explored ancient ruins in Greece, marveled at the bustling streets of Hong Kong. For 4 glorious months, I was just Rachel, not the responsible older sister, not the family disappointment. Just me. But all good things must come to an end. As the ship docked back home, reality came crashing back. I turned on my phone, bracing myself for the barrage of messages. Surprisingly, there were only a few missed calls from my parents. Feeling lighter than I had in years, I headed home. But as I approached my apartment door, I heard noises inside. My heart raced. Had someone broken in? I cautiously opened the door, only to find myself face to face with Lily. She was sprawled on my couch, surrounded by shopping bags and empty takeout containers. "Lily?" I gasped. "What are you doing here?" She looked up, barely fazed by my sudden appearance. "Oh, you're back. Finally." I stood there, key still in hand, trying to process the scene before me. "How did you get in here?" Lily rolled her eyes. "Don't be dense, Rachel. I used the spare keys you gave Mom and Dad. I needed a change of scenery. Everything at home reminded me of, you know." I stood there, staring at Lily, trying to process everything. This was too much. I needed air. "I'm going to the store," I muttered, grabbing my car keys and heading for the door. But when I reached the parking lot, my car was nowhere to be seen. Panic rising, I called my parents. Mom answered, her voice sickly sweet. "Rachel, dear, how was your trip?" "Where's my car?" I demanded, cutting to the chase. There was a pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line. "We sold it." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "You, what?" Lily needed cheering up, Mom explained, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "We used the money to take her shopping, to the spa." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That was my car. You had no right." "Now, Rachel," Dad's stern voice cut in. "We're family. What's yours is ours. Don't be so selfish." Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration, resentment, and anger came pouring out. "Selfish? You steal my car, invade my home, and I'm selfish? I want my money back, now." Their response was immediate and harsh. They called me heartless, ungrateful, a disappointment. The words stung, but for the first time, they didn't break me. I hung up and marched back to my apartment. Lily was still there, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Lily looked up, shocked. "What?" "Get out now." She tried to argue, to manipulate me like she always had, but I stood firm. For once in my life, I put myself first. The next day, I hired a lawyer and sued my parents for the value of the car. They were furious, threatening to disown me, to cut me out of their will. But I stood my ground. The case went to court. It was a grueling process, laying out years of emotional manipulation and financial abuse for strangers to judge. But in the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in my favor. My parents were forced to sell their house to repay me. They moved into a small apartment, all the while painting me as the villain who had ruined their lives. But for once, their words couldn't touch me. As I drove my new car home from the dealership, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. Free from expectations, free from manipulation, free to be myself. I cut off all contact with my family. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. The first few months were hard. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness. But slowly, I began to build a life on my own terms. I threw myself into my work, rising quickly through the ranks. I made new friends who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could do for them. I traveled, I learned new skills, I found hobbies that brought me joy. And most importantly, I learned to love myself. To appreciate my strength, my determination, my worth. Now, as I sit in my office, looking out over the city, I can't help but smile. The path I chose wasn't easy, but it was mine. I built this life brick by brick, decision by decision. And I wouldn't have it any other way.